That night, the darkness swallowed the empty roads, stretching endlessly ahead of me as I began my drive back to campus. Barely 30 minutes in, exhaustion started to settle in like a heavy fog, pulling at my eyelids, luring me into a drowsy haze. My body felt drained, and with every passing moment, I found it harder and harder to keep my eyes open. Realizing the danger, I decided to pull over at a gas station that appeared along the quiet, desolate road, hoping to regain some energy. The gas station was eerily quiet. The store was closed, no cars were around, and the only source of light came from the dim, flickering street lamps. I sat in my car, utterly drained, my mind too foggy to think clearly. I told myself I would just close my eyes for a few minutes. The moment my eyelids shut, a strange sensation washed over me, like something unseen was watching, lurking just out of sight, waiting. When I jolted awake, I was no longer alone. A silver car had pulled up beside mine. An uneasy feeling gnawed at my chest as I spotted it parked so closely, despite the vast emptiness of the parking lot. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. A man wearing a white hoodie with the hood drawn tight, his face concealed behind a strange, unnerving mask. My heart pounded as he walked toward my car, his hand reaching for my door handle. I knew, in that moment, that if I didn't leave immediately, something terrible was about to happen. About 4 years ago, when I was in college, I attended a university that was about 2 hours away from my girlfriend's college. I would often drive down to her campus on Friday afternoons, and we would hang out for the weekend. Typically, I would leave to go back on Sunday nights. I usually tried to leave by 9:30 p.m. at the latest so I could get back to my dorm by midnight, since I had a 12 a.m. class on Mondays. However, many times I stayed later than I should have. One time, I stayed until nearly midnight before starting my drive back to campus. Unfortunately, not long after I started driving, maybe about 30 minutes in, I began to feel extremely sleepy. I kept going, hoping that I would feel more awake, but I only became more and more tired as I continued. I started struggling to keep my eyes open, and it was quickly becoming a dangerous situation. I realized I needed to stop and do something to help myself wake up, maybe get an energy drink or something. I kept my eyes open, looking at the sides of the road for any gas stations or rest stops. I knew I couldn't make it much farther without falling asleep. When I saw the next exit, I took it, hoping I would come across something. The exit led me down a quiet road, and not too far ahead, a gas station appeared. I was really happy to see it. I pulled into the parking lot, but when I did, I realized the store part of the gas station was closed. The lights were off inside, and there were no cars in the parking lot at all. I even got out and tried the door, but it was locked. Defeated, I went back to my car and got inside. I was still extremely tired, so I sat back and closed my eyes. I wasn't thinking clearly because I was so exhausted, and I figured maybe I could take a brief 15-minute nap. All I know is that when I closed my eyes, it felt so good. I started to drift off, and within about 15 seconds, I was out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to see a car was parked next to me. I was groggy and almost went right back to sleep at first, but I had a bad feeling. The feeling was almost like I needed to get away from there, like I was in danger. I looked at the car that was parked next to me. It was a silver sedan, and it looked about 20 years old or so. Then, the driver's door opened. I felt a little suspicious because they had parked right next to me, out of all the other spaces in the parking lot. I could barely see the person as they walked around the car and over to mine. When they made it around, I finally saw them. It was a man wearing a white sweatshirt with the hood up, and he had on a type of mask that covered his whole face. It was like a costume mask of some sort, but I didn't recognize the character. When he approached my driver's window, I had no interest in sticking around. I started my car right then, and as I did, the man attempted to open my driver's door. Thankfully, my door was locked. I put my car into reverse, backed up, and drove away from him. I saw him then start sprinting back to his car as I sped out of the parking lot. Suddenly, I was wide awake, and I didn't feel like sleeping at all. I sped onto the road and back onto the freeway. I wasn't driving recklessly, but I was definitely pushing the speed limit. When I got back onto the freeway, I saw a car merging right behind me. It was the silver car. I had no plans to try to outrun them, so I drove at a normal pace. The guy sped up until he was right behind me, probably within 5 feet of my car. Feet of the back of my car, maintaining that pace for a good minute or so. There were no other cars on the freeway at all. This area wasn't very populated. In fact, most of the drive from my girlfriend's college to mine was just farms and woodland. I don't think I had seen another car the entire time I had been on the freeway. I sped up just a little, and as soon as I did, the guy behind me did the same. I switched lanes back and forth once, and he mirrored my movements. Then, he sped up and hit the back of my car. I couldn't believe it. He crashed into me again, but this time, it was harder. I thought this guy had to be crazy or something. He backed off briefly, then went forward and hit me a third time. This time, it was so hard that I nearly lost control of my car and almost spun out. In desperation, I sped up, but as I did, I noticed that up ahead, there seemed to be a semi-truck. I kept speeding up, and so did the guy behind me. When we got closer to the semi, the guy behind me switched lanes and sped off, passing both me and the truck. He was probably going over 100 miles per hour when he passed it. I slowed down once I reached the semi-truck. The truck honked at me, probably noticing the damage on the back of my car. I slowed down even more and called the police about the situation. I'm not sure why I didn't think to call them sooner, but it was probably for the best. I might have crashed trying to handle the phone while driving. An officer eventually came out and pulled me over so I could give my side of the story. He had me take the next exit and stayed with me while I called my roadside service. I ended up staying awake all night, waiting for my car to get towed and dealing with everything. I never found out what happened to the driver of the other car, whoever he was. I'd recommend that nobody drive late at night unless they absolutely have to, and especially never drive if you're tired. I used to work at a bar, and this story took place during that time. Because of the job, I would typically work really late into the night. One time, I finished work at almost 3 o'clock in the morning. It was only about a 10 to 15 minute drive back home, which wasn't too bad. All the roads I took were quiet, with no highways or freeways. That night, however, I had completely forgotten that I needed gas. The fuel light had come on while I was driving to work, but I didn't stop and instead told myself I would get gas on the way back. Unfortunately, it had been a long day, and for some reason, it never crossed my mind again. I didn't even notice the fuel light on the dashboard. About halfway home, my car suddenly stopped running. I coasted to a stop on the side of the road, and even before I came to a complete halt, I knew that I had run out of gas. I felt so stupid for not getting gas earlier. I was on a very quiet road and hadn't seen another car the entire time. The area where my car stopped was surrounded by dense woods on both sides, but I knew there was a gas station up ahead. I had driven this route to and from work many times before, and I believed the gas station was about a mile up the road. It would probably take me 10 to 20 minutes to walk there, but I didn't see any other option. I couldn't call anyone I knew because they would all be asleep at this hour. Everything was eerily quiet. I opened my car door and heard a few crickets chirping in the night. I then went to the back of the car to get my gas container. I was feeling a little creeped out about having to walk alongside the woods for such a long distance. After grabbing the gas canister, I walked around to the front of my car and stepped onto the shoulder of the road to begin my walk. I had made it maybe 10 feet in front of my car when I suddenly heard a noise coming from the woods. It sounded like it might have been an animal or... I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared into the dark, dense trees. The sound came again. This time, it was closer. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but the feeling of being watched crept over me, making every hair on the back of my neck stand on end. For a moment, I considered running back to my car, but I knew